The other day, I posted a brief clip of the CityLYNX Gold Line on the Charlotte subreddit. The post was really just meant for fun because I think it's cool and it was generally positively received. However, it did spark some interesting debate over the streetcar that I did not expect. There were some interesting, nuanced opinions that I'd like to share and some general disinformation about transit in cities that I'd also like to address. I felt like a video would be a good way to explore and answer a few questions. Is Charlotte Streetcar any good? Does it make sense as an investment for the city and for taxpayers? What is the role of a streetcar in cities anyways? Let's discuss. First things first, some background and basic facts. Depending on where you're from, you may hear the words tram or trolley used in place of streetcar, but they can all mean the same thing. Essentially, in North America, your typical streetcar will probably be a low-floor light rail vehicle, or LRV, that runs on tracks embedded into a public street with other traffic. It'll be slightly larger and longer than a bus and stop at slightly raised platforms to allow for easy boarding and deboarding. The subject of this video is the one and only streetcar operated by the Charlotte Area Transit System, also known as CATS, and it has one of my very favorite names of any transit line, the CityLYNX. Personally, I'd love some more cat-themed transit. Anyways, the line operates through uptown Charlotte, what a non-resident may think of as being downtown. This is the center of the largest city in North Carolina. The Charlotte-Concord combined statistical area clocks in at about 2.8 million residents and is one of the fastest growing areas in the country. Now, streetcars are hardly a new concept. Here's some artwork of Charlotte's network from 1935. In fact, most American cities had expansive networks like this, which were ultimately replaced by bus routes or removed altogether in favor of cars in the mid-20th century. It wasn't until the start of the 21st century when we started to see a so-called renaissance of streetcars in revenue service for public transit purposes, with cities like Portland and Salt Lake City leading the way. Charlotte was no different. The CityLYNX Gold Line was planned to be the preferred transit mode of the Center City Corridor, as it was called ever since the late 90s, but priority was ultimately given to the Lynx Blue Line light rail. The streetcar finally began service in 2015 across a 1.5 mile long stretch between the Spectrum Center and Presbyterian Hospital. At this point, the streetcar really seemed, to some at least, more like a vanity project intended to drive some economic development uptown rather than an effective form of transit. In fact, the first rolling stock used on the Gold Line were replicas of 1920s era streetcars, which were noisy and low capacity and felt more like a tourist attraction. However, in 2014 and 2015, the city voted to allocate funds towards the Phase 2 extension of the Gold Line, which opened only slightly behind schedule in August of 2021. The streetcar line now includes 17 stops over 4 miles served by the state-of-the-art Siemens S700 rolling stock, which is actually just a newer version of what's used on the Lynx Blue Line. A Phase 3 extension is planned to significantly increase the length of the streetcar to 37 stops across 10 miles. And while I wouldn't be surprised to see construction begin before 2030, the funding hasn't yet been secured. So now that that's out of the way, let's discuss the main question that I came here to answer. Is this thing any good? Is the Gold Line, or can it be, a form of transit that actually gets people out of their cars or helps those without any? And from these conclusions, what can we say about other similar streetcar lines across North America? There are a few categories that I believe are generally a good way to evaluate a transit system: frequency, comfort, cleanliness, planning and payment systems, utility, and relative speed compared to other modes of transit in the area. Let's start with frequency, and with it, reliability. On the Reddit post I made about the Gold Line, one user responded, if only it ran on time, according to the app. Tried to catch it from Sunnyside and it had left over 10 minutes early. Another user chimed in, there goes our $150 million bus that's doing 1/5 the amount of daily trips as promised. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the discussion about the streetcar was generally positive, but frequency was for sure the most common complaint that was mentioned. And for good reason. My own experience was that it really just didn't run often enough. The CATS mobile app shows a train departing each direction from a given station approximately every 20 minutes. Compare that to systems in places like Philadelphia or Kansas City with 2 to 5 minute headways. When I was staying in Charlotte, the streetcar line passed right by my hotel. When I needed to head out or head back, If there was a streetcar coming within a couple of minutes, it was fantastic. But half the time it was just faster to walk wherever I needed to go rather than wait for another tram to arrive. I think there's a big asterisk here, though. Across the world, the COVID pandemic has affected transit ridership and frequency, and Charlotte is no different. Ridership actually beat initial projections when it first opened, but I found it to be pretty empty when I was there, although I wasn't usually riding at what I'd consider busy hours of the day. I wholly suspect that ridership will see a big uptick regardless as the pandemic subsides, especially now that the Phase 2 extension is finally opened. As this happens and the labor crisis also dies down, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the city deploys more cars to the line and frequency increases. I think a sub 10-minute headway should be the absolute minimum for this line until Phase 3 opens, where it should increase even more from there. Next, comfort and cleanliness. As mentioned, the Gold Line features beautiful Siemens S700 rolling stock, which are truly world-class vehicles. The ride was smooth, reasonably quiet, and kept in great condition. No issues here. I think an underrated aspect of transit systems are their planning and payment systems. In this case, I used the CATS mobile app, and this experience was fantastic. Since this is used for all of Charlotte Transit and not just the Gold Line, I will keep this part brief. As soon as you open the app, it shows you exactly what stations and lines you're closest to, and when the next trains or buses will arrive. It also made it really easy to pay with a credit card. The user interface was clean and it wasn't ever buggy or slow, at least in my experience. Truly one of the greatest transit apps in the country that I have used anyways. Hell, my home city of Raleigh doesn't even have one at all. Truly impressive stuff. Next up is utility. Where does it take you? Who is the target user? What major destinations or transit connections does it serve? Well, my stay in Charlotte was the perfect use case for this system. I stayed in a hotel near French Street, and since I took the train to get to Charlotte in the first place, I didn't have a car. There was a pretty shocking lack of restaurants near my hotel, so the streetcar provided a great way to go pick up some food for lunch and dinner. Not to mention, since it goes right through a major corridor downtown or uptown, it was the best way to hop on the bus back to the Amtrak station or even to the Lynx Blue Line light rail if I had reason to head farther away from uptown. Transit connections will be further improved with the completion of the Charlotte Gateway Station, which has a Gold Line stop, a planned Silver Line light rail stop, bus rapid transit red line, and maybe eventually commuter rail, and very importantly, Amtrak. I am very excited for this project, and I think it will do a lot for the city. But aside from that, we've got stops right at the Spectrum Center and other uptown destinations, a university, a community college, and other clusters of residential and retail buildings. Overall, there's a lot going on around this line, and I feel there are plenty of folks who could find some use out of it, but probably a lot more once the Phase 3 extension is done and crosses paths with more residences. Lastly, speed. For anyone who doesn't have a car and relies on this system, this makes less of an impact. But to get people out of their cars and onto public transit for convenience and not just the sake of the environment, it takes something that is competitive with driving. Streetcars are just not the solution to this. While the S700 LRV can reach speeds of 60 miles per hour, you'll almost never find it doing so as it travels in a shared right-of-way on the street in mixed traffic. So at best, it cannot go any faster than the traffic in front of it, but it's also stopped by traffic lights and, importantly, the stations. A grade-separated light rail would of course still have many stops, but in its own right-of-way, it can make up a lot of time and often be faster than cars who get stuck in traffic. There's another comment on my Reddit post that I'd like to address. One user said, as is true with most of these cool mass transit systems, it makes no financial sense. They then go on to give some cost per passenger mile figures that paint streetcars in a pretty negative light. To reiterate my response to this guy and the post itself, I have to question the accuracy of the figures they mention, as those were clearly predictions from a decade ago, and even then I wasn't able to find the quote and determine whether they were really ever accurate or not. Other commenters made comparisons to buses or pointed out that the Gold Line really just replaced an existing bus line with similar frequency, but streetcars really do have some major advantages over buses that shouldn't go ignored. For one, electricity from a catenary is much cheaper and more environmentally responsible than power generated from diesel. Some cities are of course implementing hybrid or electric buses, but even then, maintenance costs are higher and lifespans are lower. The streetcar in its current configuration also blows most buses, even large articulated ones, out of the water in terms of capacity. It has standing room for over 200 passengers, which is a lot. And of course, capacity can be increased without the need for more drivers by simply attaching more cars. Rails rather than rubber tires on a road also simply make for a smoother ride for passengers. But do I think that this system is worth its price tag of almost $160 million? Yes, absolutely. It is a small price to pay for all that the system will bring over the coming decades. Right now, it's good, not great. It might not be perfect for a lot of people right now, but the city is laying the groundwork for a system that will in the future. When the Blue Line first opened in 2007, I bet a lot of the same complaints about its price and utility were vocalized by the community. But it has since grown to be a widely used and beloved service, especially after its expansion opened in 2018. You also have to think of the alternatives that the city or state DOT could do with that money. For example, more highway lanes, something that will make traffic even worse and often clock in at a price tag that is orders of magnitude higher than the Gold Line. Of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but investing in transit early really has been a hallmark of great systems across the world. Give it some time, wait for the pandemic to subside, wait for the Charlotte Gateway Station to be complete, wait for the Phase 3 extension. I like it now, but slowly and steadily, this can become a world-class system. Certain aspects of it already are. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed.